Do we need to ban medical testing on dogs? We're discussing that today. MPs will debate whether dogs should still be used to test medicines before human trials. It comes after a petition demanding a ban gathered nearly 250,000 signatures. Camp Beagle, the group behind the petition, says dogs are being bred in the UK in inhumane factory-like conditions. They also claim dogs are being left unattended for extended periods. The government doesn't like the idea of a ban, as it says products need to be tested before they're given to humans. In 2023, nearly 2,500 dogs were used in medical testing. I can't believe, on 7 or 8 years I've done the show, we've never talked about this, whether we're comfortable with using dogs to test cigarettes and perfumes or whatever.
I think we're talking about medical testing.
OK, medical testing.
And you have a choice. Either you test things on humans to find out whether they work, or you test them on animals. And I think it has to be that we make a moral decision, ethical decision, that you cannot perform tests on, let's say, premature babies, live or die. What kind of test do? You don't. You have to try and make them live. But you also want to make sure that they don't suffer problems. I have a personal experience of this. I had a 25-week premature baby. And if there hadn't been testing on animals, she would extremely likely be blind, just as Stevie Wonder was. Exactly the same thing.
What was the same? What was
that if premature babies need to be given oxygen to live.
OK.
But if you give them too much oxygen, it blows the vessels behind their eyes.
Oh, my goodness. Is that what happened to Stevie Wonder?
And they noticed this through observation. There was an incredible doctor called Arnold Patz who thought this might be the case. And oddly enough, no one would give him funding to test on newborn premature babies. It had to be tested on animals. And generations of babies have not gone blind since because of finding out that link and proving it with animals.
That is quite an amazing argument, well presented, Michael.
I totally agree. I mean, I think the movement against sort of animal testing when it came to perfume, deodorant, smoking, whatever, that was good.
Yeah.
I think the movement to stop
I think
medical testing on animals is a bit misplaced. I mean, maybe they could be more nicely treated. I'm a dog owner, I love dogs, but it's better to test it on a dog than on a person.
Well, I did have a comment a while back saying the way of sorting this would be to try out all new drugs on animal rights protesters. Don't think that's on the cards. We hope we're going to talk to the guy who's protesting, because then he'll give us a run for our money here. But there are medicines and medicines, right? Now, you've given the most fantastic example of where you cannot run tests on premature babies to see if excess oxygen blows their retinas. I understand that. But what about the removal of a wart, where you're going to force a dog to have a wart on its face and then use fire to burn it off or something? What about mine? Not all medical things are important. Not all medical things I might suffer are as important as a dog's life.
I think there are a huge number of people who, if they had a large wart on their face, would think it was very important. And it might be superficial, but it might also be psychological. And I don't think we want any medicines used or procedures undertaken on humans as par for the course, unless we know they are safe.
You've both said this more or less the same thing. John Curtin is a campaigner for Camp Beagle. You're on your way to London for the debate. I don't know if you've heard what's been said here, John, but I've got to say you've got an uphill battle here, because you've got two people who think animals should be used for medical research.
Well, I suggest to you they're the only two people that I've come across in the last 2 years and 9 months that have supported animal experiments. They're the only two people, and I suggest they're doing it for your show, that are speaking up in favour of animal experiments. The tide is against them. And listen, when I'm sick, I don't go to the vet. These tests are cruel, useless, outdated. They belong in the 1950s, and that's what the scientists were saying. I would have liked to stop animal testing because of the morality. It's the science that's going to stop it. They don't work. It's institutionalized. John, the argument against is that if you don't test on animals, you have to test on humans, and that is unthinkable. talk to the scientists, talk to them about artificial intelligence, talk to them about organ on a chip, talk to them. Listen, Jeremy, the mobile phone I'm talking to you has got more computer capacity than the entire NASA space missions of the 70s. Science has moved on. I watched 2 vans leave MBR on Friday. They went to Sequana, who specialise in testing on dogs for agrochemicals. Those tests that those dogs left for on Friday haven't changed one bit in 70 years. Ask the scientists. And what your jury panels are saying some of today is something that I used to come across in the 80s when I used to do a stall. Now
right,
people are like, what?
Well, so the MBR you referred to is the testing place you're protesting against. Michael, has he convinced you?
Well, I'm just not convinced that scientists no longer think that we need to do medical testing on animals. I mean, from my understanding, it's generally the scientific community who want to do this stuff because they say that we still, potentially in the future, I totally accept your point that maybe in the future, AI will develop to such a point that we don't have to actually test this on a real animal because we can test it on a hypothetical human. But I don't think we're there yet.
Grass. Stop kicking it off into the long grass. When will the future come? Last year at our debate, the Tory minister said the day cannot come soon enough when we can put an end to these testing. That day is not now. That day is now. A statue was erected in London, the brown dog statue in 1906. Broken-hearted anti-vivisection campaigners were asking then, men and women of England, how long shall these things be? That was in 1906. Okay. The tests are discredited. Your panelists are not science. Find a scientist that will stand up and defend these crude, horrible, nasty tests.
They're animal lovers. They're animal lovers, John.
Me too.
Yeah,
me too, and I'm sick of it. I'm sure if we got together around the table, we'd agree with a lot. And surely would they agree to ban testing today if eminent scientists come forward and say, yeah, we've got to do it? Because I'm telling you, they're queuing up at the door.
All right, but John, it's more Annunziata. Would you agree to ban testing today if John could convince you that he could do it on a machine instead of an animal?
I think that when you are taking things that can make the difference between life and death in human beings, you have to have the fullest possible reassurance they are safe. And in fact, the best way of still doing that at this moment is by testing on other mammals.
And beagles, because beagles apparently don't sort of snap back when the tests are done on them. Thank you, John Curtin of Camp Beagle. Kevin in Cheshire, what do you think?
Good morning, Jeremy.
Morning.
How are you?
All right.
Good, good. You know what I do? All these people these murderers are horrible people in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of keeping them watching television, giving them PlayStation, say, look, you can be a tester for this instead of the animals. Let's cut the animals out.
Yep.
Let's give the dogs a PlayStation.
No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, test it on murderers.
Instead of spending loads of money keeping them and then just keeping them to let them die. Let's let them do some good in the world instead of killing kids and all that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to argue. Well, you're going to argue against that.
Well, I don't think there are enough murderers. And also, you know, when you go for that's
not a great argument, to be honest. That's not a great argument.
It's true, there are enough murderers to get a statistically significant result. Also, if you look for those adverts for sort of medical testing, there's always these conditions. You have to be a non-smoker. You have to not be on any other medication. Yeah. I'm not sure murderers are perfect specimens.
Well, testing on women would be really short because virtually all murders are men.
And also, you would end up testing on Lucy Letby, who has there's a massive question mark over the conviction of some people. So you'd be
imagine the compensation claims when people get found not guilty afterwards.
Well,
But the discovery of DNA led to 17 people being let off death row.
I think also medical testing on prisoners, bad history. Probably shouldn't go there.
Yeah.
Well, we had the whole infected blood scandal because the Americans were getting their blood for blood transfusions from prisoners. Thank you, Kevin. Interesting idea. It's my PASAG way of saying not a chance. Maggie in Suffolk, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, what do you think?
Well, I'm actually against this testing. I was a nurse. I'm a retired nurse. And I understand what Miss Rees-Mogg is saying, and both panellists, but I just don't think ethically it's okay. And actually, the dogs that get tested on, they only cover those tests to a certain level, so stage 1. And when you get a dog that's got one of the diseases that they've tested on, cancer's a good example of it. When you go to the vets, they'll say to you, you need to sign a form to say we're prescribing this off licence, because they've only studied the dogs for humans. So they've used them for that. They've got a certain level of information, but the companies haven't taken that further to test to see if this is going to help the animals fully. So the least you could do is actually invest so that your dogs get been used. Let's follow that through and be sure that we're giving them as safely as possible as well.
Thank you. Sue in Devon, hi.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely disgusting. This should have been banned years ago. You know, I'm a dog lover. I have 3. I've had them for years, lots of different dogs. And the thought that these poor creatures are having all these nasty injections of God knows what injected into them is absolutely disgusting. You know, if people want testing, let them volunteer. Let the humans volunteer. Stop doing it on dogs or any animal. It's absolutely disgusting.
You know, weirdly, you'd probably get a lot of humans volunteering. I don't know if you remember the Elephant Man story, where a man basically blew up after taking some sort of experimental drug about 15 years ago in London.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And I thought this would put everyone off doing those tests. And actually, where I worked, the BBC was inundated with people saying, how do we get in touch? Because people wanted to, you know, because it's an extra way of earning some money and there are safety.
Well,
I think you would get human volunteers.
It's a good argument for animal testing, because if you stop doing it on animals, you're going to end up doing it on poor people.
I suppose you will get people doing it for money, and that's probably not good.
And you can't do anything on children or babies.
No, you can't, or indeed...
Extra pocket money.
Anyone.